right. Well, welcome everybody to Coffee and a Mic, part of our Queen Creek Lead series, brought to you by SRP and EPCOR. Big round of applause for our sponsors. And for Sidewalk Coffee and Bagel, we are so excited to have Representative Biggs with us today. Thank you so much for your time. We know how compressed it is these days, and perhaps our last visit with you as a U.S. representative. We've covered a lot of ground over the years, so I'm excited to be able to get into some of those questions and talk a little bit about what's happened over the years and where we are in this final congressional session.
Great. Good to be here. Thank you for having me.
So recently, vacation started a little early, and there was all kinds of drama and procedures and things that unless you really follow Congress, you don't really understand how they came to be, but it all seems to center around the SAVE Act. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what happened, where we are, and then tell us about the SAVE Act itself.
Yeah, so the SAVE Act, this is a bill dealing with election integrity, Save America Act, and it is actually polling in this case is supported by about 80-20. It's an 80-20 issue, and so it's passed out of the House 4 times and has gone over to the Senate and has just been sitting there now for a good year plus, and it is a signature bill for the president. It's a signature bill for his party, our party. And so, and I'm not trying to be partisan, I'm just saying that is a signature bill that we hear from constituents about, quite frankly, daily. And the goal is to try to get that through. The Senate, as Senator Thune, who is the majority leader of the Senate, has taken the position that he can't get it through the floor. So I don't want to get too much in the weeds, but I will. So what you have is there is a 60-vote cloture rule, and what the 60-vote cloture rule does is it closes debate and allows a bill to go forward for a vote on the floor. So in a really close majority, which is what we have in the Senate, you can't really get cloture unless it's a fairly benign piece of legislation. So they can't get the 60. But the filibuster rule is really separate from the cloture rule, because the filibuster rule, if what happens is if one party comes in and they demonstrate a quorum, which is 51 members, and calls that bill up, you can have the debate, and the debate will allow for filibuster, which means that you could stand up and speak for as long as you got the capacity to keep speaking, and that would go on. And that each person in the chamber gets two turns at that. But most people don't take it, they get tired, you don't see a lot of that. But also at any time, anybody could stand up and say, I want a quorum call, which means that 51 people have to come to the floor and demonstrate that you still have a quorum going. But at the end of that period, which I would guesstimate would be about 9 to 14 days, because that's when people would get out of gas and they would do it, then it's a straight 51 simple majority vote. But rather than do that, they left town. So a couple weeks ago, we were ready to keep going in the House. We're doing our stuff, and then the Senate just kind of like up and left town, and then they finally came back, and then this happened again. I can't remember if it was last week, but I think it was last week at the beginning of the week. They said enough's enough, and they left town for 2 weeks. So the question is, will they come back, and will they allow the normal procedures, which, by the way, the filibuster, there was not, until about 1918, you had a simple majority to close the vote and go to the floor. But then, I won't get into that Byzantine and his history, but it's really interesting how that came about. But then it got expanded and then reduced, and so now that's, about 50 years ago, it went to 60. So where it sits right now is, and I'll point out, because this I think you may be asking me a question about this later, but there is not a plan, at least that we're hearing, where the Senate is going to go in and do just the traditional filibuster rule. It's just, so it's sitting right there dormant. The president has basically taken the road bill, the housing bill, and he has said that he's not going to sign it because they won't, because the Senate won't take care of the Save America Act. And what that means is that bill will become law without signature. Because I think, and I want to say that's tonight at midnight or something like that. I think
We're getting close.
Yeah, we're getting close to the dime. And so I think he's not going to sign it. It will become law because that's the constitutional mandate. And so that will be the law. In the meantime, there are many in the House that are trying to put the Save America Act on virtually every bill that's coming up, and that's been met with some disapprobation by some in leadership, and some on our own team, some on the other team, but it is a constant battle trying to get that through. I don't know if that clarifies it or made it even muddier.
I think some of the keys are that they are pushing hard for the SAVE Act,
Yeah.
but perhaps at the expense in some people, if they end up getting their way, of some of the other bills that we really need to have go through as well.
Well, it's not really, I would just, I don't want to quibble, but I'm not sure that anybody's trying to kill those other bills.
No, they just won't be heard.
But they could be, and some of them are. And so I should add what the next step is, what I think is going to be the next step. There is a you're getting more of the Byzantine rules than you ever wanted to. There's a process called the budget reconciliation process. And we've already done 2 budget reconciliation bills, which is highly unusual. There is a 3rd reconciliation bill that's being proposed, and as part of that, the Save America Act would go into there. But in order to make a reconciliation package work by the rules, you have to spend money, and it can't just be without a pay for. You have to show how you're going to pay for that money. So what they're proposing right now, when I say they, I'm talking about a couple of the committee chairmen and leadership is considering this, is to make the Save America Act, at least some of the more major components of that act, tied to money, which would go to states who enact these components of the Save America Act with a pay for over here. And the reason that you have to do that is because the Senate does a process where the parliamentarian, an unelected person, determines whether you've met the rules of it's called the bird bath, but it has to meet the rules of the Senate. The Senate, of course, could change the rules with a simple majority or overrule the parliamentarian with a simple majority, but we don't think that they will because they never have, at least in my experience. So
we have a lot of intrigue happening.
A lot going on there.
Yeah.
So.
Well, let's talk about the content of some of those bills.
Okay.
And we touched on the SAVE Act, but one thing that we're particularly concerned about is permitting reform and energy production, as well as critical minerals. We're short on both. Energy production is going to become a big topic as we head towards 2030, as our use goes up exponentially. So we need all of that production. We need the copper to be able to get it done. Tell us what's happening there, and what's happening in some of those committees.
Yeah, so there's three main permitting reform bills that are going. There's the Certain Act, the Freedom Act, and also the Speed Act. Now, the Certain Act is designed primarily to actually, and I don't want to get these mixed up, but where there's better coordination, because right now there's a congeries of federal agencies and bureaucracies that have their own fiefdom where you have to comply with all this series of the agencies. This bill is designed to actually coordinate that, maybe even put a dashboard together so you can see where you are and finish up. Right now it is not moved, but that's sitting there. The Freedom Act is a similar act trying to actually give specific timeline deadlines to the agencies themselves. Because right now, as you know, some of them have permitting deadlines where they have to issue that permit by a deadline, and then there's no consequence if they go beyond. This is trying to actually get them to actually live within the deadlines, which would actually speed up the process. The bill that's actually moved out of the House is the Speed Act. And the Speed Act is in response to the U.S. Supreme Court case Slaughter of last year regarding specifically NEPA or some of the environmental permitting processes, where the court said NEPA is meant to be a procedural issue, not a policy-making issue. So this bill actually, and all these, by the way, these are all bipartisan bills. So the Speed Act, at least in the House there, I don't know what's going on in the Senate, but the Speed Act would actually get the NEPA process moving more swiftly by procedure and eliminate some of the extraneous moving targets that have creeped in over the years.
So this is one that's pushed hard by the U.S. Chamber and the local chambers, in particular, to put a shot clock on there so that you have X amount of time to bring up lawsuits, because there should be lawsuits. That's how we get good public discourse. But then after a certain amount of time and a certain amount of attempts, it should be done. And the same with the NEPA discussion. So you can go through years of process right now and then have somebody say, oh, well, there's another regulation that you haven't addressed yet. So now we're going to focus on this one for the next 5 years.
And I'll give you an example of why this is important to fix. So we don't have any refineries in Arizona, right? We have to import all our gas is imported. Our gas is imported. But we don't have any refineries, and so people ask me, if we had a refinery, that would help if we were pumping in and then we could refine. I've met with one of the companies that is the biggest refiner in the U.S. and I asked them, I said, would you ever build a refinery in Arizona? And they said, no, absolutely not. And the reason that they won't is not necessarily because of anything Arizona's done, but because of this process and how much it costs. So they say it would $10 to $15 billion to build this refinery, and it would take 7 to 10 years. And they don't want to get in there 3 or 4 or 5 years in, $6 to $7 billion in, and have a NEPA adjustment come along that adds another $3, $4, $5 billion to it and extend the project another 7 years. We have a mine that is actually, I think they're getting ready to pull that first ounce of copper out of it, but they have spent almost 20 years going through all of this process, and they've spent billions of dollars without a single ounce of production. But it's coming up. But it's coming up. But the problem. This is the problem. it takes a major corporation. It's not, the small entrepreneur is basically frozen out. But this is the way it goes with everything, like from energy to critical minerals, which you mentioned. These things, these kind of processes are really, in some ways, it's in the hands of the individual or the panel of bureaucrats that are reviewing along the way. These bills, all three of these bills, are designed to actually put more certainty and more speed into the process. Not to weaken necessarily the environmental standards, but to actually put certainty there so everybody going in knows, okay, this is the timeline, this is how much it's going to cost us, this is what we have to do to comply. They want that certainty. Businesses want that certainty.
Absolutely. And that's something that we're pushing hard for, because it's going to come up to get the copper production that we need to be able to get the nuclear facilities up and running at some point. And yeah, you build the refinery and then find out that they've mandated electric vehicles again, or something along those lines. So all of that, though, is going to take a lot of water. And Queen Creek's very fortunate that we aren't necessarily reliant on the Colorado, but a lot of the industries that we just touched on are. And in some way or a form or another, it's all one big pool, if you will, that we're all dependent on. So what do you see happening with the 7 states and what the feds are going to do?
So we're dealing, just so everybody gets the context, the Colorado Basin states, Colorado River Basin states, there's 7. You've got the upper basin and what's called the lower basin. The upper basin are Wyoming, Colorado, Utah, New Mexico. Lower basin, Arizona, Nevada, and California. And the allotments were divided in 1922 along those lines, and they were evenly matched. And the hydrology is kind of, it was maybe more hopeful at that time. Maybe in any event, we're not getting as much water off the river or being produced into the river basin as previously. And I say that, and some would dispute that, but I'll just leave that as the general consensus of the folks watching it. The feds have some authority that has been given to them through various modifications of agreements, through various modifications of laws. So the Bureau of Reclamation is the one agency right now which is tending to the agreement, because there has been some agreements made and there has to be adjustments made on the river. The proposal last January from the Bureau of Reclamation, and they were behind in giving us that, but the states themselves were behind in not getting to their agreement. So when you get there, they proposed no reductions to the upper basin whatsoever, and about 1.4 million acre feet of reduction to the lower basin states. This is on an annual basis. And because of the structure of that, the lower basin states, and Nevada doesn't get much off the river, so their reduction would be very de minimis. California is the only priority state in the system, so their reduction is also, I'm going to just say this, disproportionately small. And so that means that most of that reduction comes to our great state of Arizona. So what we've done, I'll just talk about what we've done, and then I'll get to underground water for just a sec to tie into that, because I don't want panic. I don't think people should panic. I think you need to know what we have as far as resources. So what we've done is I've met with Bureau of Reclamation multiple times. My staff has met with them multiple times. We've tried to intercede. The state legislature has done a proposal, and we've supported that and forwarded that and worked with them in getting that to the feds. And two things. So There is another series of reservoirs, the largest being the Flaming Gorge up there in the upper northwest of Colorado, kind of Wyoming, Utah area, that has a lot of water in it. And it's not just water, it's power, because you get power off Glen Canyon and Hoover. So my office was actually in there pitching them relentlessly, you should be releasing some of the Flaming Gorge to backfill. When we first talked to them, they said, absolutely not, we're not going to release any. And by the time it was done, and I'm not saying we should take credit, because I think it was a lot of people putting pressure on, and they finally released some, but they only released about a third of Flaming Gorge water to come on down and get into the system to make sure that you don't have a dead pool situation in Lake Powell. So, but that's one thing that they did, and that's one thing that we participated in. Another thing is, through a lot of advocacy, the reclamation somehow found $450 million for mitigation efforts, and we, along with some of our friends in California, but Rep. Stanton and I led an effort to get that money. So $350 million of that for mitigation is coming to the southern or the lower basin states. So we're able to get some of that. The other thing that I'm working on on the Colorado River, because I think this is really important, I will just say this, because the logic behind the reclamation is illogical, because they said we're not going to cause a reduction in Colorado and the upper basin because they don't use all of their allotment. You follow me on this? I'm like, I'm trying to get that. I'm trying to understand that. I said, well, that is a reason you should go ahead and reduce their allotment and adjust it down to whatever they're taking off the river. And then you could bring it down, even if it's just going to be stored in Powell and Meade, so you can actually save those. Anyway, and so we've pushed relentlessly and led delegation letters, etc. Withdraw it's called a DEIS. Withdraw your DEIS, issue a new one with different considerations. And so this gets to other things that we've been doing. So I've had direct communication with the Secretary of Agriculture to let her know that this is a national food security issue. Arizona's water is a national food security issue because 7-8 months out of the year, 90% of green leafy vegetables, broccolis, it's coming directly from Yuma and that valley down there. And so I told her, I said, you don't want to be surprised if you see fields going fallow and now you have a shortage and you'll see a spike in prices. So she actually sent one of her undersecretaries down to have a meeting that we organized down with Yuma growers so that they could actually make the case directly. And we've continued our negotiations and discussions and information giving to the Secretary. We've also, I'm trying to make this case too, so the Secretary Ludnick, I've met with him and talked to him twice about this is a national economic security issue because you now have TSMC, you've got Intel, you've got all these industries now that are the focal point, not just nationally but internationally of these industries, and they need to have the water support. And I always say we're not asking for more than our share. We just need enough to keep going, and so I think he gets that. And then last week, I met with the Undersecretary of War to make the case that this is a national security issue because you've got 6 military bases here, you've got 4 reserve centers here, you've got the optics corridor, strongest in the nation, perhaps the world, is down in southern Arizona. You've got Raytheon, which is the number one in its field of missile production and ancillary stuff. We even, most people don't know this, we even produce, we have 60 businesses that produce more than 60 different items for naval ships in Arizona, for military ships. We've got, you've got Boeing and Northrop Grumman. We just started going there like this. And they said, we get it, we get it. And I said, well, if you get it, then you need to go to Interior and help them get it too. And so, and by the way, I've met with Secretary Burgum. He's been very, very cooperative. And again, we continue to work with I could keep going. We continue to work with Reclamation. And I'll just get, the last point I'll tell you is that my biggest concern is that Reclamation in our last meeting, and it was a briefing given to members of Congress of the basin states. They said that absent a statewide agreement, and there is a proposal out there from the lower basin states, and we actually make, in my opinion, pretty large concessions. Arizona does. And I'm not sure that they're going to accept those, the reclamation, but they're going, if absent an agreement, they're going to go ahead and foist their own agreement, or their own position on us, and then they intend to actually, that's, the agreement will be out at the end of this month, and then they intend to actually enforce that agreement by October 1st. This is my biggest concern, because I think we're working with California now pretty well, which is the first time I can actually say it. Everybody always tells me that, and I'm like, wait a second, I know what's going on there. That's not true. But this is actually the closest we've come to where California's made some concessions which they didn't have to make, and they're involved. And there's so many more things that California could do to really help, but they are helping us now, and I'm really concerned that if Reclamation doesn't accept that, this might produce litigation. Litigation is not good for anybody, because it becomes a 10-year, 15-year, and in some cases, over the course of water in Arizona, there's been protracted litigation for 20 and 30 years, and it's expensive, and it's crazy, and it's unpredictable, and but don't fear. We have over 600 million acre-feet of underground aquifer water in Arizona. We do. That's from the current governor's own ADWR. The question that you have to ask then is, how do you clean it up, and how do you distribute it? And just to give you the magnitude and scope of that, that's a 300-year water supply with our normal growth rate, and no recharge filling in. So that's the reason I say that, is because when people hear what's going on in Colorado, the panic ensues.
We're all going to run out of water.
Yeah, let's not panic. Let's manage our resources, and let's continue to try to get what we can off the river.
Yeah.
Sorry,
no,
because you asked.
I
mean, what do you want?
I love when you come and give us all of this. But you did touch on some things, and I think it's important that we go straight to those. So in Arizona, energy production, critical minerals, all key to our economy and to the nation's security. But we also have most of the defense contractors here, and if it flies, it probably got built here. And with everything that's happening in the world, we're talking about substantial increases to military spending. How do you see that playing out for Arizona and for all of those companies?
Yeah, this is an incredibly huge industry in Arizona, hundreds of billions of dollars, and there is coming up part of this. I mentioned the reconciliation package when we were talking about the Save America Act. There will be a request of, I believe, $300 billion in the Department of War. And a significant portion of that is going to find its way right to Arizona, because if there's one thing I know that the Department of War is really, really familiar with and really interested in, it is Raytheon. And because that their missile production is going to probably get ramped up some more. We were able to get in the last NDAA, the Boeing Apache helicopter has been extended, the life of that has been extended to 2050. So all of these industries, Northrop Grumman, also NAMO, all of these companies are going to be on the receiving end of some of these contracts that are going to come in, and that will mean more employment. That will mean more lines. I mean, so like I don't know what they're working at Raytheon, but my guess is they're going to ramp that up.
It's going to go around the clock.
Yeah, if they're not around the clock, they will probably be around the clock, based on my discussions with DOW. So it's going to be really beneficial to us on an economic point of view, and from a job point of view. And we've got, and the optics industry down south is also going to pick up on that too.
And all of that highlighting again our need for power and
oh yeah, did I
minerals
leave out
and
power?
water.
Oh yeah, you want power?
Well, but I think we can see where that's headed. But one thing along the way then is probably more people, and that brings us to housing.
Yeah.
And the Road Act that you mentioned that will probably become law today or tomorrow,
Yeah.
by default. Tell us about that.
So the Road Act started off in the Senate, and it was a heavy, just a massive, huge act. Came to the House and got pared down significantly, was much improved in the House, and then went back to the Senate, and the Senate basically put everything back in. The problems that I have with the Road Act is, in my opinion, it doesn't actually address the problem, which for me is scarcity of houses. That's the problem. It's not subsidies. It's if you can get the interest rate to come down, and I think the president is trying to bully pulpit the interest rates down. The interest rates come down, and if you facilitate abundance of housing, the prices will come down. What happened mostly in this bill are a bunch of subsidies that for low-income housing and multi-unit housing. That's the main component that they have. And then they were one of the things they were talking about is they're also attacking the short-term rental, and the short-term rental issue in Arizona is particularly acute. I don't know how it is in Queen Creek.
It's bigger than you would think.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me. I do know that places like Sedona, massive. Even in Williams, when I talked to the mayor there, I want to say he told me 18 to 20% of their entire housing supply is short-term rental. So people who want to live there, young kids coming in, they get crowded out. They can't. So you've got this scarcity. And I'm not sure that their mechanism in there actually is going to solve it, to be frank with you. So the big part for me was we couldn't get them to fix that, and the president acknowledged all the errors, all the problems I'm telling you. He acknowledged these, which is part of the reason. I don't think it's just Save America. I think he understands pretty clearly that this does not alleviate the scarcity, and if you don't alleviate the scarcity, you don't increase the housing stock, and if you don't increase the housing stock, you don't reduce the prices. And I was looking at Queen Creek, and I think the average is like $628,000 is the median price. If you don't increase the stock, you won't have affordable housing for young people in particular, and that's one of my biggest concerns. Is I want young people to be able to buy houses, because they'll form families, they'll become part of the community, they'll really drive this up. But that was my problem with the Road Act. I think it's unfortunately probably been oversold as to what it's going to accomplish, and I think Congress will probably have to go back to the drawing board about a year from now and do something better. And I also think that the states are probably going to have to respond differently.
One thing, though, that we keep pushing back on is removal of local control of zoning. So,
Yeah. And that was in, by the way, that was in there too.
Right?
Yeah, that was in there. That was another issue that I believe I raised
yes.
somewhere along the pike.
Some of the things we have on here, immigration reform, of course, and getting tighter control. Since we've talked over these years, border situation has come under control. That's amazing how it just dried up all of a sudden. And a lot of the things that we talked about have already been fixed on that. Of course, we would still like to do more in terms of being able to get legal workers here and be able to track them. Is there anything that's happening on that front right now?
Yeah, there's some percolating on particularly H-2Bs first. I think that's where people are trying to solve those, and think of it as temporary ag workers coming in, and that is the where I see people focusing and maybe galvanizing a little bit about that. And that would probably be the first thing that Congress gets done. I don't want to give any false hope, so I'm going to give you the timeline so you understand. I believe that there's potential for that bill, but it's iffy if something on H-2Bs get done this session. We're going to be in, I go back Monday, I think we're there, 2 weeks, and then all of August is off. And then we're there for 3 weeks in September dealing primarily with budgeting. And if you're going to fix H-2B, you have a shot maybe in the budget bills if they go normal. Well, I shouldn't say normal. If they would go exceptional, because the normal is now not to do much, as you know. So that would be, because my guess is they end up blowing into another continuing resolution. That'd be my guess. And they're going to want to finish that up by probably the 21st of September so they can get out and have the rest of the time before the election. I'm just telling you, whether
the practical way.
I'm just telling you that's the dysfunctional body that I work in. And I just want to share that with you so you understand the timeline, because the H-1B is more complex. You and I were talking about this beforehand. H-1B is interesting because you have data that says that there's crowd out of U.S. citizens who are coming out with engineering degrees and they're having trouble getting these jobs. And on the other hand, you have businesses other data that says that we've got lots of jobs available. So we're having a trouble, in my opinion, kind of matching employee to employer. So that's part of the complexity. The other part of the complexity is there is widespread allegations, and they comes to us, to Congress constantly, that you have some groups, some companies that are paying the foreign H-1B employee significantly less than the American born, and so maybe that's part of the complication. The other part of the complication is you have massive numbers of student visa foreign-born engineering students who come in and they come out and now they want an H-1B visa, and so again you're trying to balance all of those things out. And my watch of this in my years in Congress has been anything that's complicated. If they can boot it down the road, they will boot it down the road. And I think that's why I think H-2B is so much easier, and that's where and there's a lot of chatter about H-2B. H-1B, people are like, yeah, we'll get back to that.
We'll deal with that at some other point.
Yeah. So sorry, I hope you understand. I am telling you just transparently what's happening.
And we appreciate that. Along those lines, what's one piece of legislation that you would want all of us as business owners to know about?
There's a whole host of them, but I'm going to talk to one, and you're going to say, how can that possibly impact us? And that is the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act is still, it's not moving. And by the way, you've noticed that there's not been any major thing happen here, even during the World Cup. And the reason is the FISA is not really, they have an executive order, and they have other authorities that are there, so they don't need FISA. But FISA is the act that has been used to surveil wrongfully American citizens. And in that FISA Act it allows, if you are, let's say, a coffee shop and you have a Wi-Fi service, they deem that if they want, they can go in and demand without warrant that you provide them all the data that you have and have access to that. This is the kind of surveillance that I don't approve of, and so have been fighting against. The reason I tell you that I think is something you should be aware of is because I don't think most businesses realize the exposure that that particular bill puts on all businesses.
Yeah, and
you deep breath, Chris.
currently expired, right?
It's expired right now. Yeah,
but trying to be revived.
Yeah.
What do you think might pass before the end of the session, given us that backdrop that you painted?
I think you're going to see the NDAA come out. That's the National Defense Authorization Act. It is authorizing appropriates.
The one that would bring all of the money to Arizona, presumably.
Well,
and others.
Yeah, it's different. The other one I think that you might see pass, that's the one that the additional bump is, and that is the additional appropriation, the additional reconciliation 3.
Okay.
So those two might pass. I think there's a shot that you're more likely to see an NDAA. You'll see probably the reconciliation. You will see in September the spending bill come out. Even if they only do it to the lame duck session, which would be post-election, they will do that spending. They won't fight a shutdown. I mean, one party wants to shut down so they can blame the other party for the election, but the party and the majority, we don't want to shut down, so you will see something happen to prevent a shutdown until post-election. So those three things definitely. Then there's a whole host of other things that could come out. And I'll just talk just a couple. Two of them are my bills. One is the CSAFE bill, which actually allows law enforcement to actually investigate and prosecute. We could do the investigations somewhat, but we facilitate investigation and prosecution of exploitation of minors for sexual purposes on the internet. So that's one thing that passed out unanimously. You would think that they could just do that. We're pushing on that. And the other one is a bill that passed out bipartisan, which was the court monitor bill that I introduced, and is in the Senate now, and has John Kennedy from Louisiana is the sponsor in the Senate. So I think that could come out. I think Senator Grassley will do something with that, and if he does, then it'll come out quickly, and probably in September, I would guess that bill comes out too.
Some important pieces there. That's good news. You touched a couple of times on continuing resolutions. We've talked almost every year that you've been here about the budget process.
Right.
Do you think we'll go back ever to what the budget process is supposed to be? And if we don't, should there be something just done to codify that?
I thought last year we were going to get close. And just so you know, that we're supposed to pass 12 budget bills out of the House by June 30th. They go to the Senate. They're supposed to pass them out by July 31st. and in September you're supposed to come together, reconcile, and do it. That's the budget process. What typically happens is the House gets 7, 8, 9 of those done, sends them to the Senate. The Senate does 1 or 2, and then everybody kind of gives up and says we're going to do the continuing resolution, which basically keeps the spending where it is, depend whatever your baseline, whatever you're going to use as your baseline. I think you have a shot at getting some more out of the House. I don't see anything moving in the Senate, to be frank with you, until you get to the continuing resolution, and I don't want to see codification of the continuing resolution. What I would like to see instead is and this has been proposed, is some kind of hammer over the members of the House and the Senate. So where maybe your salary is reduced if you don't get this done.
Get the budget done.
Yeah, get the budget done. So, I mean that's yeah, but the point is, of course, we'd have to vote on it, right? so we're going to ask these people that don't really have an incentive to get the budget done to be willing to punish themselves. But surprisingly, I do think that there's a lot of people that are so frustrated that if you could get a vote like that on the floor, wouldn't surprise me if you could get 100 to 150, roughly a third of the body to vote yes.
Vote yes.
Yeah.
So it's been 40 plus years since we've actually followed the
1976.
50 years.
Yeah. Sorry to say, that's just the way it is. And I came out of the state, right? And in the state you got to have a budget and it's got to be balanced. And I remember in the first meeting, and they were talking about this, and I'm like, what? What are you talking about? What do you mean we're just gonna continue? How do you have oversight over the spending? How do you determine that? We're sitting at a $2 trillion structural deficit every year. In a few years, we'll be sitting at about $70 to $75 trillion national debt. And I've talked to economists on both sides of the aisle, and they say that's absolutely unsustainable. Absolutely unsustainable. And so, at some point, I'm hoping, but I always hope. I'm an optimist. I mean, there have been times over the last 3 years I thought, this is it. We're going to really do it. We're going to actually do something significant here. Because I've asked them. I said, okay, I know you aren't going to get to a true balanced budget. You're not going to close that $2 trillion gap. Can we at least bend the spending curve down? Because we're at record revenues. So just bend the spending curve down, just a little bit. So we're moving at least in the right direction. And they're on the agricultural bill, they bent it down by $60 billion, which is pretty good. Or was it maybe 60 million?
That might be a little bit more in line.
But I couldn't believe it. At least somebody was trying to bend it down a little bit, it was imperceptibly so, but at least somebody had it in mind. And that's my point, is that I remember Paul Ryan telling me, I don't know if you have more time. I don't know how I'm doing on time before
we got just a couple minutes.
So Paul Ryan telling me when I first got elected, and he said, what he asked everybody what committees you want to be on, and I told him, and he called to tell me what committees I was going to get, and he said, I was surprised. He said, I know you wrote the budgets in Arizona. I was kind of surprised you didn't want to be on either budget or appropriations. And I said, well, you said that we couldn't get on, if we were freshmen, we couldn't get on those committees, so that's why I didn't tell you. He said, yeah, we couldn't have put you on appropriations anyway because you would have voted no. and I'm like, well, that says it all, does it not?
That lines it up right there.
Yeah.
We do have just a minute or two, but this is perhaps our final meeting as
I hope not.
As representative. What else strikes you as you reflect on that time that you've had?
Well, it's been an honor to serve, and I've got some of the best communities in the country right here in Queen Creek, and in South Mesa and Chandler and Gilbert and Santan Valley and some of the county. And I will tell you that I have people from around the country say, you sure are lucky to have a good district like that. And I am, and I thank you.
Well, thank you. We have just a minute or two for questions. Let's.
So I know there's been a lot of stoppage of payments and things like that for the border and the ice, was mostly on the news. But the Coast Guard got really wrapped up in that.
Yes, they did.
I have a lot of friends that are in the Coast Guard and not being able to make their payments and things like that. Is there any hint that maybe they'll put them back into the Department of War so they get funding, or separate them out? Because they do defense work.
Yeah, they're important. Well, we've talked about whether we should realign them different places so they know that they're going to get paid.
Right.
There's been talk about actually disbanding DHS, because and disaggregating some of that. But there's been no decision. And one of the problems that we had here was that they decided to take ICE pay, ultimately, ICE funding out and put it on its own, which makes me very nervous for ICE going forward. But we'll have to see how that plays out. But
So I think September is another opportunity for them to lose their paychecks, right?
yeah, but I don't think that'll I mean, yes, that's the shutdown I'm talking about, and I don't think, at least on my side of the aisle, everybody wants to make sure there's not a shutdown in September, and we'll continue to fight that. But I anticipate that's why I think you're going to get a CR probably coming out of the House around the 15th or 16th of September, over to the Senate and back out by the 21st. That's my belief.
Representative Biggs, thank you so much
Thanks.
for your time. We know you have to move on from us, and hopefully we'll see you again soon.
I hope to. Thank you very much, Chris. Thanks
Thank
for
you.
being here. Yeah.